counsel to investigate Russian interference into the 2016 election. Seems like a good time to assess how's it going. Well, the investigation is costing millions of dollars. It's producing thousands and thousands of hours of cable news commentary. Our political system has been brought to a virtual standstill. We still await the investigation, its conclusions. 1 year in, though, what do we know so far? Well, certainly nothing we were promised at the outset of the investigation. There's still no evidence of any plot by the Trump campaign to collude with the Russian government to hack the presidency, to beat Hillary Clinton. There's no evidence that Russia hacked any vote totals, for that matter. There still isn't any proof they were behind the hacking of John Podesta's emails. We still even haven't seen evidence that they had anything to do with the DNC hacking. People have been charged with crimes, but only for behavior totally unconnected to Trump's campaign or because they allegedly lied to Mueller's investigative team. In the case of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, he apparently was charged with a felony perjury crime, even though his FBI interviewers, we just learned, didn't believe he was lying when they spoke to him. So a few people are having their lives destroyed, but for nothing that we can see. No collusion has been found or even suggested. Doesn't mean we haven't learned anything, though. We have. We've learned that when Russia did try to influence the 2016 campaign, they weren't very good at it. They spent a small amount of money on online ads that almost nobody saw. Most of them were in states that had nothing to do with the outcome of the race. They weren't competitive. The ads weren't even all on Trump's behalf. Some were against Trump. Instead of backing a specific candidate, their greatest interest seems to have been sowing chaos and disunity in the American political system. And on that front, of course, mission accomplished. More than anything, though, we've learned just how clueless the people who run Washington, D.C. are. Rather than accept the fact that they created Donald Trump themselves by abandoning and then coming to despise the rest of the country they run, they couldn't face that, so they concocted the Russia collusion story as a way to sustain a world where they did nothing wrong, and they only lost because their enemies betrayed this country to a foreign power. For more than a year, Russia was all they could talk about because they certainly didn't want to talk about the issues that got Trump elected in the first place. Drug ODs, a vanishing middle class, their agenda of literally replacing the people who live in this country with immigrants. They didn't want to talk about that. But it hasn't been working. For most of Trump's presidency, Democrats have looked forward to the big midterm wins that will give the control of Congress once again. That's the whole point of all of this. But it hasn't worked. Their lead is dwindling. It's now within the margin of error. They may not win back the House at all. And it looks like the Senate is going to be beyond their reach. Why? Because the public has recognized that the Russia investigation is not what they said it was. It is, and it has been from the beginning, a witch hunt created by a cabal frantic to keep its hold on power. Tom Fitton has been tracking the Mueller investigation from the very first day. He's also the president of Judicial Watch, and he joins us now. Tom, is that an unfair summary of what we've learned? Have I missed something? Have we gotten any indication of actual collusion a year into this?
No, we haven't. You've been much too charitable, Tucker. If honestly evaluated, the Mueller investigation has been an unmitigated disaster. If the media were covering the Mueller investigation the way it was covering the Trump presidency, I think we'd all agree it hasn't worked. It's failing. It was created based on an illegal leak by James Comey. Many of the people who inspired the Mueller investigation were fired from the government. Sally Yates, the acting attorney general, Andrew McCabe, the deputy AG, James Comey, the FBI director, Andrew McCabe, the deputy FBI director, all three fired for misconduct. They helped get the Mueller investigation rolling. You have the Clinton DNC dossier that was hidden from the American people being used evidently by Mueller. We have the Flynn investigation under attack because of the corrupt way in which it was initiated and investigated by the FBI, where they said he lied when evidently he didn't. And on top of that, we've got a federal judge questioning the ultimate authority of Mr. Mueller. And we still don't know what his authority is a year out, because he's evidently had secret conversations with the Justice Department about what his authority is. And on top of it, the Russia investigation, the key aspect of it, the Russia troll indictment, it's now being turned into an opportunity for the Russia intelligence operations to go into a federal court and demand evidence from Mr. Mueller about what they have on Russia intelligence operations, namely intervention in our elections. What a disaster for the rule of law. And frankly, the president has been victimized through all of this, because evidently there's nothing to justify an investigation of him requiring Justice Department resources and authorities the way that's been misused to date.
But I thought, and quickly, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, the whole point of an independent counsel is to assure the rest of us that the investigation is on the level, that it's not tainted by potential conflicts. Given that, why didn't Mueller try harder to at least seem bipartisan? Maybe hiring one registered Republican as an investigator. He didn't bother to do that.
Well, it's the arrogance of the deep state. They think they can do no wrong, and Mueller and Comey are part of the same team on that regard. On top of that, you have him hiring Democrats with abandon, and then you have the page-struck text messages. You know, he kept those two FBI agents off of his investigation because of bias and hid that from the American people for 4 months. You know, Mr. Comey, if he were a typical government official, would have been asked to resign a long time ago.
Well, that's a really good point. Tom Fitton has been following this from day one. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
It's pretty obvious that the Democratic Party's relentless focus on Russia to the exclusion of all else, like issues that matter to people, may have been a mistake politically. An article this morning in the Daily Beast makes a ludicrous claim. It says that Democrats actually wanted to spend the last year and a half talking about real issues, health care and the economy, but they couldn't somehow because cable news stopped them. Rachel Maddow told them not to, apparently. Cable instead forced them to talk about Russia. They didn't want to. Luckily, we kept copies of the tape, and here's what they actually said about Russia.
There is no question that Russia attacked us.
Were attacks, ladies and gentlemen, on our Constitution.
Attack on the integrity of our elections.
An attack on our democracy.
We are only at the beginning of understanding what the Russians did to affect our elections.
I think there's a broad recognition among our members that Russia is not our friend.
Why does it not worry Donald Trump that the Russians, according to the intelligence community, tried to and indeed did kind of infiltrate and undermine our democracy by what they did?
Richard Goodstein is a lawyer. He advised both of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaigns, and he joins us tonight for what's going to be a tough conversation for him, I would say, Richard, because
I don't think so.
It's not really plausible to make the case that, look, you can argue that Russia hacked our elections, as Democrats have argued for the last year. They're our main enemy in the world, as they've also argued. And, you know, maybe time will prove you right. I doubt it, but maybe. You can't argue, if you're a Democrat, that what you really wanted to talk about was the issues. You didn't really want to talk about Russia. You just happened to talk about it nonstop for a year. Nobody's going to believe that because it's a lie.
Well, again, it's the intelligence community, Tucker, not Democrats, not Republicans. The intelligence community is the group that said that the Russians try to undermine our democracy. So don't lay that off on me or any Democrat.
Hold on. There's no intelligence community. There are a number of federal agencies, some exclusively devoted to intel gathering, others partly, like the Coast Guard. There's no intelligence community. There's no consensus on anything.
There's a director of national intelligence.
More than 3 pieces. Yeah,
there's a director of national intelligence. There's a head of CIA. Every single person who's charged with overseeing intelligence for this country, when asked, and when their agency was asked, said that the Russians tried to interfere. Look, the fact of the matter is, the Russians approached the Trump campaign and said, we have stolen materials. Would you like them from the Hillary Clinton campaign?
Right.
Donald Trump Jr. said, love it. Putting aside what ultimately happened later.
I would say we've plowed this ground before. What I'm asking you is a political question. Clearly, this is not bearing fruit for the Democratic Party. Their lead is within the margin of error. This is a political matter. It's just not working. Okay, they're not going to retake Congress on the strength of the Russia story. Now they're telling us we never wanted to talk about Russia in the first place. And all I'm saying is that's a lie. Yeah. And don't lie to me when I've been watching TV for the past year and all you've talked about is Russia. Did Rachel Maddow make you do that? I mean, don't lie to me.
Look, the fact is, I think there's 2 tracks. I think the fact is the Democratic Party knows it's not going to win this election. They're not going to win the 2018 elections just talking about Mueller or Trump even. They've got to have an affirmative agenda about economic justice and social justice, okay? But the fact of the matter is Donald Trump, we used to say he was at historically low approval ratings. I checked today. Jimmy Carter actually edged him out. So he's now second most unpopular president this far into an administration.
Right. You're absolutely
okay?
right. So why aren't the Democrats going to take Congress and put Pelosi back in the speaker's seat?
Every election, we just had that special election in Arizona. Trump won by 21. The Republican won by 5. Every single Republican who won the House last year by 16 points or under has to be looking over their shoulder and scared to death because this momentum is unabated.
No, but okay. Look, Democrats have a lot of energy. It's a midterm in the president's first term. Of course, they're going to gain seats. There have only been, I think, 2 elections in American history that didn't happen. So it's going to happen. But Democrats don't look like they are a lock to win back the House, given the president's relatively low popularity. And you're absolutely right. Half the country doesn't like him. Democrats should be way far ahead of where they are today. And the reason they're not farther ahead is because they're not running on anything. And to the extent they are, they're running on things like more abortion and more illegal aliens and things that are insane and scare people. And you know that.
Well, again, we'll see when 2018 midterms roll around. All we know is from every other single special election, the Democratic wave seems to be on the order of 10, 15%. And you can say what you want at this point. That will take out a lot of incumbent Republicans. Will it continue? That remains to be seen.
But that was going to happen no matter what. No, but hold on. Will you just, for the sake of honesty, will you concede the Democrats didn't spend the last year telling us that Russia hacked our election, whatever that means? It was a lie. But they didn't say that because Rachel Maddow made them or Morning Joe sent them a memo and they had to obey. They said it because they thought it would work, and it didn't.
They were horrified. They were horrified that the Republicans, that the Russians did this, and B, that the White House was indifferent or worse, was complicit. That's the thing that Democrats have been talking about.
They don't care about this country. If they cared about the country, they'd secure the borders and fight back against China. I mean, the countries that are actually controlling our policies get no pushback from the Democrats at all because they don't care.
We had a net outflow, frankly, from the U.S. to Mexico. In the last 4 or 5 years of the Obama administration, we had a net outflow. That's how much they care about the border. The people were leaving, not coming in.
Yeah. Richard Goodstein, thank you.
Sure.
Good to see you. A year and a half ago, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff came on this show and seemed very confident that proof of Russian collusion would soon be forthcoming any day. Here's what he said. Can you look right into the camera and say, I know for a fact the government of Vladimir Putin was behind the hacks of John Podesta's email?
Absolutely. The government of Vladimir Putin was behind the hacks of our institution and the dumping of information.
Of John Podesta's email.
Not only in the United States,
email.
But also in Europe.
Okay, you're not, you know what, you're dodging.
And you're carrying water for the Kremlin.
I'm not carrying water for the you're a sitting member of Congress on the Intel Committee, and you can't say they hacked.
You're gonna have to move your shoulder to RT Russian television because
you know what?
This
That's
is perfect.
Just so
this is
beneath your office. Well, it didn't quite turn out that way somehow. Author and columnist Mark Stein joins us tonight. He's been watching too. He's here to celebrate the year anniversary of the Mueller investigation. Mark, a year in, do you think that history has proved Congressman Schiff right?
Well, I must say, I really enjoy your show on Russia Today television. What is it, Tucker's Kremlin tonight? I love it. The babushka who reads out the bingo numbers is absolutely terrific. The fact is, there are no Russians in the Russian investigation. They've indicted a bunch of Russian trolls who are never going to be standing in any American courtroom. That's absolutely preposterous. They might as well indict Macedonian content farmers. It would all be an absurd joke if they weren't actually destroying American lives, like those of Michael Flynn and Carter Page. Whatever you feel about them, they don't deserve to be trashed because they're the designated fall guys for a totally corrupted investigation. I'll say this, Tucker. I take it as read that foreign governments prosecute their own interests in other countries' elections. Russia does that. France does that. The United States certainly does that. And often in its allies, too, as when Obama interfered in the Israeli election and in the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom. I take that as read. It's far more disturbing to me when the elements of the domestic government interfere in their own country's election, which is all we really know now after a year of watching Mueller's absurd investigation play out. That significant elements elements of the US government were interfering in the US election. That's actually far more serious. And as for Richard's point about the intelligence community, I think that's actually part of the problem. The last time I checked, more than 4 million people had top security clearances. That's actually 4 times the population of my state, the one I'm in at the moment, New Hampshire. It's about the population of New Zealand. There shouldn't be an intelligence community, so-called, and if there is, they should all go off to some farmland in Pennsylvania like the Amish and raise barns. They're just mischief-making here.
It's hardly a community. They don't agree with each other on anything. But quickly, is it plausible when you hear Democrats a year in say, you know, we never really wanted to talk about this. We wanted to talk about getting rid of the carried interest exemption or whatever. Is that believable?
No, they finally figured out what most of us figured out 11 and a half months ago, that nobody's interested. Everybody understands, you know,
right,
John Podesta's password was password. You don't have to be a Russian or a Macedonian. The average 7-year-old boy could hack into John Podesta's account. That's how easy that is. This thing is ridiculous, except for the real American lives it's destroying.
I think one of my kids may have done that, actually. I'm going to check after the show. Mark Stein, please stick around. The creepy porn lawyer is back. He never really left. Oh, okay. And Mark's been following his career. And we'll get an update on that with him in just a minute. But first, new data show just how overwhelmingly left-wing the faculty at elite colleges are. Perhaps it's no surprise, one professor says, that the left is becoming intellectually arrogant. He joins us next. The United States formally opened a new embassy in Israel today, moving its old location from Tel Aviv to a new one in Jerusalem. The official opening comes on the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence, and just over 5 months after the president announced his plans for the move. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, at least 55 Palestinians are reported dead tonight, more than 2,400 injured. Israeli soldiers opened fire after Palestinians began setting fires and throwing firebombs across the Israeli border fence. Others attempted to force their way over it. It is the single deadliest day in what have been weeks of violent clashes between Palestinians and Israelis along the border with Gaza. Meanwhile, Turkey, which is a nominal ally, a NATO ally, has recalled its ambassadors to both the United States and to Israel in protest against the move of the embassy. CNN Turk, and that's CNN's pro-government propaganda outlet it maintains in Turkey, responded by uncritically publishing statements from the Turkish government, including an accusation that the United States is complicit in crimes against humanity. That's what the CNN propaganda outlet did. We contacted Turner Media to see if they were reconsidering their... Well, the academy has leaned left for a long time, but at many schools that tilt is becoming monolithic, utterly monolithic. A new report looked at the faculty at more than 50 top liberal arts colleges and found that if the service academies are excluded, Air Force, Navy, Army, registered Democrats outnumber registered Republicans more than 12-1, and much more than 12-1 on some campuses. The higher up the food chain you go, the more unbalanced it becomes. This lack of ideological diversity is breeding arrogance, among other things, say some. Gerard Alexander is a political science professor at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. He just wrote a great piece for the New York Times over the weekend warning liberals, you're not as smart as you think. Gerard Alexander joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So what do you mean by that? Liberals, you're not as smart as you think?
As every writer knows, they don't choose their own titles, and I might have preferred something a little bit less clickbaity or aggressive. But I just was trying to communicate to liberals, who I think many of whom mean well for the country and don't realize some of the effects they're having, that their tone, their approach to a lot of our national conversations about a whole slew of issues can attract and persuade people. Giving a speech from an Oscar stage, giving a lecture on a campus, using all kinds of, the platforms that they have in American life, the prominence they have in American life. There are times when that can be used to set an example, to educate, to attract, to lend celebrity and credibility to points of view. But it's distressing to me how often those platforms end up being used in ways that communicate a self-righteousness, communicate a tone of intellectual and moral superiority. How often they're used to berate instead instead of to persuade. And I think one of the effects liberals don't realize they're having is how much they're alienating other people. I think it's almost entirely inadvertent. And I think it's one of many trends in American life that's really unhelpful that we could better avoid. And I try to give in the article an idea of ways that they might try to avoid doing that.
Diversity was supposed to be the guardrail that prevented people from going off into self-righteousness and lack of self-awareness. Having people around who disagree with you, who bring different life experiences to the conversation, was supposed to broaden us. If in most universities there's nobody who doesn't agree with you, you never meet anybody with a different view, why wouldn't you become arrogant and dumb over time, as they have?
It's a serious problem. Liberals have been such great forces in modern American life for bringing certain kinds of diversity to the table and being enthusiasts about that. And who doesn't think America has benefited from more African American faces, more Hispanic voices, more women in prominent positions? America has benefited intellectually and other ways from that. But they really have had a blind spot when it comes to what some people I admire greatly have started calling viewpoint diversity, maybe better than ideological diversity. And academia.
But wait a second. What's the point of ethnic or gender diversity if not to bring viewpoint diversity? I thought that was the point.
It absolutely.
Okay, so how can it, like, in other words, if you have a group of people who all look different but come from the same culture and have the same views, how is that in any sense diverse?
Well, originally they didn't come from the same viewpoints. People who came from the Jim Crow South had very different life experiences than upper middle class Northerners. But increasingly, what's happened, especially through American universities, is a trend towards gender and ethnic diversity, racial diversity, but not intellectual diversity. And I think that's been really costly, and I think just some of the ways you're suggesting. It breeds, among other things, an incredible intellectual complacency. And I think in the sense that, for example, viewpoints that conservatives might voice come under tremendous critical scrutiny, are really questioned or really raked over the coals, and often presumptively rejected as illegitimate or unpersuasive. Whereas a lot of assumptions held by people on the American left go unexamined and for long periods. And that's the kind of intellectual environment in which error can thrive, in which orthodoxies can gel, and in which, you're right, in which viewpoints can become, instead of diverse, they can end up becoming homogenized. And there's a real danger that that's what's happening. Not in the sense that all people on the left agree with each other, because on campuses they don't, and any academic knows that. But orthodoxies and homogeneity in the sense that they stop reflecting the true diversity intellectually of the whole country. And that really is happening.
Nicely put. I'm glad that you're in that environment and I don't even know what your political views are, but you're asking the right questions, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Professor. San Francisco's sanctuary city law is so broad, so far out, that even a pretty liberal mayoral candidate says it's too much. She said that law needs to change. She joins us next. Fairly left-wing mayoral candidate is fed up with them. Angela Alioto is collecting signatures for a fall ballot initiative that would scale back the city's sanctuary policies that for years she supported broadly. Currently, city law blocks the police from reporting even habitual criminals and those suspected of felonies to federal immigration authorities. Alioto says that needs to change as the city is becoming a magnet for illegal immigrants who are also dangerous criminals. Angela Alioto joins us tonight. Angela, thanks a lot for coming on. So I just find it's a measure. I doubt you and I agree on much politically, which is why I wanted to talk to you. I don't think that you consider yourself a conservative. That's probably true. No, I don't. So I guess the headline is the policies in your city are so crazy that even you who support sanctuary cities says enough. Is that a fair assessment?
I not only support sanctuary city, I wrote the law. I wrote the law in 1991, and it was amended in 2016 to add felons.
Well, why would someone amend it to add felons, people who are demonstrably dangerous to the citizens and taxpayers of your city? What was the idea there?
I have absolutely no idea. But as the author of the sanctuary law, I find it totally unacceptable. And so I'm writing this ordinance for the November ballot. Says that dangerous and serious felonies are simply not going to be allowed to have the protection of a sanctuary law. I mean, it absolutely makes no sense that the elected officials of San Francisco don't understand what the people of San Francisco want, and what they want is to not have felons protected. But the elected officials want to protect the felons.
So, I mean, that's kind of the question. In a democracy, big policy should have popular support. Are there hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, dozens of San Franciscans who say, you know what, I want my city to protect dangerous felons?
Not that I know of, because I've been out on the campaign trail for 5 months, and I talked to people about the fact that my sanctuary law was amended to add not only misdemeanors and felonies, but dangerous and serious felonies with up to 3 within 7 years, some ridiculous wording. And the people are aghast. They're like, they don't even know that that's what was in the sanctuary law. But when they find out that it's in it, they're really shocked. And I have great support from the people. However, from the elected officials, they had a press conference 2 hours ago. All of them lined up in front of City Hall, condemning me and calling me names, basically, because I want to take felons out of the sanctuary law such that they are not protected should they commit a serious or dangerous felony. It just is so.
What are they saying about? I mean, it's like a bare minimum for governance. If you're in charge of a city, you ought to be putting the protection of your people ahead of everything else. No? So what were they calling you?
Well, I've been called a Nazi. I've been called Trumpian. I've been called a fascist. I've been called a racist. I'm a civil rights lawyer. I've won more civil rights verdicts throughout this nation in the last 18 years than I won the largest civil rights verdict against Wonder Bread. And then to be called a racist and a Nazi and a fascist because I'm taking felonies against children, felonies against other human beings out of the sanctuary law I wrote that was intended to protect families and children staying together in San Francisco once they got here and documented. So the entire intent of my sanctuary law went out the window when they amended it and added felonies. And right now, they're trying to make the community think I'm trying to abolish the sanctuary law itself. So now certain communities are up in arms, and it's blatantly absurd. I am going to go forward.
So when you walk through, I hope you, and we're rooting for you. I never thought I would say this about anything you're for, but I'm rooting for you in this case. But quickly, since you're from San Francisco, your family's been there a long time, you walk down the street, you see junkies shooting up, you go to Union Square, and there are people living there and defecating on the sidewalk, and the city's protecting felons, and normal people are leaving because they can't afford it. Do you think, I don't recognize this place? Do you ever think that to yourself? Like, what city is this?
Well, again, I'm the mother of 4, the grandmother of 5, a very successful civil rights attorney. If you had told me a year and a half ago I was going to run for mayor again, I would have said I don't think so. But I have to tell you, walking through the streets, seeing such poverty on the streets, something I've already addressed before and was extremely successful at addressing, seeing this unbelievable outbreak of people sticking needles in their arms and then slumping over, and other people just walking by and going to their jobs. It's totally unacceptable to me. That will not happen when I'm mayor. I will take them off the street and give them the care they need. We don't need any more money. We have the money in the budget. But to walk by and pretend that it's okay, that San Francisco, an iconic city in the world, looks like a third world country with people on the streets dying is horrible. That's why I'm running.
You know what? You better stop there, because I'm about to send you a campaign contribution, because I don't think I can control myself. I can't do it, but I want to, because what you're saying makes such sense. Angela Elliott, I know. I can't believe I'm saying nice things to you, but I really am. Godspeed. Good luck.
Well, listen, please go to www.violentfelonyreporting.
I can't let you do that, but I'm rooting for you. Thanks a million. Up next, a new study shows that climate models may have exaggerated carbon-driven global warming by as much as 45%. That's science. Why haven't you heard about that? We'll tell you next. Lines, you've heard the self-described experts. Global warming is on the brink of exterminating the human race. For more than 20 years, we've had just 1 or 2 years left to take action before it's too late, and yet somehow too late hasn't come yet. Maybe that's because the models are way off, as models often are in science. A new study in the Journal of Climate says the warming effects of carbon dioxide could be exaggerated by 40% or more. That's not a political conclusion, it's a scientific one, though you probably haven't read it in the paper recently for some reason. Why? Judith Curry is president and founder of Climate Forecast Application Network. She's also a climatologist and co-authored the new study. Judith Curry joins us tonight. Professor Curry, thanks for coming on.
Well, Tucker, thank you for inviting me back.
Oh, well, we're grateful to have you, simply because we're told that the science is what matters. We have a new scientific development. It doesn't mean, we're not overdrawing the conclusions from this, but it turns out that the models seem to have been wrong. So why aren't the people who push those models on us owning up to that?
Well, they're starting to recognize that the climate models may be running too hot. In the recent UN assessment in 2013, they raised a concern that the climate models may be running too hot, but that hasn't really changed the narrative about the alarm over this issue.
I guess the reason this is so very significant to ordinary people is huge public policies are based on these models. The amount of the proposed carbon tax, for example, all the ways we're responding to global warming are based on these models. So shouldn't our policymakers be paying close attention to whether they're right or wrong?
Well, yes. The conclusions that have been drawn from these models have been way overconfident, and they ignore so many things. Apart from the climate models running too hot, the 21st century predictions ignore all sorts of things about possible changes to the sun or volcanic eruptions or changes to the ocean circulations. They're just pushing a very simple storyline that climate change is driven solely by how much carbon dioxide we emit into the atmosphere. And that's a big oversimplification of the real situation.
But isn't that the opposite of science? I mean, isn't science allowing the data to form your conclusions rather than try to superimpose your conclusions on the data?
Well, yeah. I mean, nature has conducted the experiment for us. Since about 1850, carbon dioxide has increased by 40%. And during that same time, temperatures have warmed by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you look at that data and combine it with what we know about other climatic factors, the result we obtained is that the sensitivity of climate to carbon dioxide is about, significantly smaller than what the climate models are telling us.
Well, that seems like the headline, but it's not being written, unfortunately. Judith Curry, thank you for your honesty and your bravery. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Up next, our friend Brett Baird just wrote a new book. We'll tell you what it's about and why you might want to buy it. Brett's first interview about his new volume. Stay tuned for that. Also, there's an important update on the creepy porn lawyer. And of course, we have it from Mark Stein just ahead. Time now for the Friend Zone. We bring on one of our friends from here at Fox onto the show. Tonight, our old friend Brett Baird hosts Special Report. He's not just a newsman and a political expert. He is also a history buff and a best-selling author. He's got a new book out tomorrow, actually. It's called 3 Days in Moscow, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of the Soviet Empire. Brett Baird joins us tonight. Hey, Brett.
Hey, Tucker. Thanks for having me.
Doug Brinkley, one of the most famous, maybe the most famous Reagan historian, calls this book, quote, one of the best and most essential books ever written about Ronald Reagan. I'm impressed.
And I didn't even pay him.
Bigger than your average blurb. No, it's amazing. 3 days. You sort of boiled down the pivotal moment to 3 days. What 3 days?
Well, it's the 3 days of the fourth summit between Reagan and Gorbachev, where Reagan goes to Moscow and he meets with Gorbachev. They're finalizing the nuclear arms treaty, but he also gives an uncovered, kind of an overlooked, for the most part, speech to Moscow State University students and takes Q&A from them. we used it 3 days to jump back and look at how Reagan gets to this point and really leads to the seminal moment of the Cold War coming to an end, the wall coming down, and communism really taking a hit. The whole world was changed soon after that.
What did Reagan know about communism or the Soviet Union that others missed?
From the very beginning, he thought that communism was just not going to make it, and that it was destined, as he said in a speech, for the ash heap of history. He spoke about that for a long time, even back when he was president of the Screen Actors Guild, fighting communism in Hollywood. And you see that throughout his life. He holds that principle, gives some really stinging speeches, including calling the Soviet Union the evil empire. But when Mikhail Gorbachev comes up, he sees in Gorbachev someone that he can negotiate with. And it was tough in some of those summits. We have a lot of behind the scenes, new nuggets, interviews. Interviewed Secretary of State George Shultz, who is a national treasure. At his age, remembers meetings like they were yesterday. Some oral histories that really had never been dug into about behind the scenes. And it really paints a picture of how the Cold War comes to the end.
Interesting. I have an office next year, so I know you've been working on this book for a while. What did you come away thinking about Reagan? Did it change your view of him?
Yeah, I think at the time he was underappreciated. You know, there were a lot of books looking back favorably to Reagan, but this is more reporting on history and some of the behind-the-scenes moments and in speeches. For example, when he gives that speech in Berlin at the Brandenburg Gate, tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev, there were about 10 people inside the White House who did not want him to say that. The State Department took it out of the speech multiple times. He kept on putting it back in. And he went to that speech with it not in. And we had a conversation in the limo on the way to the wall where he turns to an aide and says, you know what, the guys at State are going to kill me, but this is the right thing to do. And he puts it back in. Now, that speech happens on June 12th, 1987. We have a big summit coming up June 12th in Singapore, and I didn't plan it that way, but there is some synergy there on history.
Can you imagine being the guy who took out the phrase "tear down this wall"? I mean, I hope history treats him badly. This book, it's out tomorrow.